Welcome to Series 1, Episode 9 of the In Her Financial Shoes podcast. Welcome to the In Her Financial Shoes podcast with me, Catherine Morgan, founder of The Money Panel, helping you to get financially naked. Listen in each week where we talk about that taboo subject of money. Listen to brutally real-life stories, step into our guest shoes and be left feeling 100% confident and in control. Oh, and we hate financial jargon, so don't expect any here. Small steps, big wins, let's go. Hi, and welcome to the show. So on today's podcast, we're going to be talking about different ways that you can save money on your food bills. Now, food bills are one of the biggest expenses for many families after covering things like rent and mortgages. So it's a really great place to start saving money. Meal planning is often something that is kind of badged around in terms of, if you plan your food in advance, you can save loads of money. And I think that's very much true, but it can also feel quite like an elusive practice or quite overwhelming to think about sitting down and planning ahead for food. And so what I thought I would do is to invite a very special guest on the show today to talk about her expertise and how she writes about being frugal with food. Now, Faith Archer, who is our guest on the show, has been writing about money for more than 14 years. She actually was previously the deputy personal finance editor at the Daily Telegraph, and she's now a personal finance journalist and a money blogger at Much More with Less. So her blog is focused very much about how she moved out to the country, lives on less and makes the most of it. So her husband and her two children made the big move from London to Suffolk, and she's used that opportunity to actually blog about her experiences. Now, Faith covers all kinds of financial topics in her blog, from bill switching to investing for women, pensions, and actually her blog initially started around budgeting with food. And she's been a finalist for the Best Frugal Food blog for the last 3 years. So who better to have on the show than Faith? This podcast episode will give you a few tips as to how you can start saving money on food. We do also go off topic a little bit and talk about some of the challenges that women face with actually investing. And Faith will be coming back on the podcast in series 2 of the In Her Financial Shoes podcast, which will start in April, where we have a whole series of guests, expert interviews and real life stories about how more women should be investing and giving you some real confidence to begin that journey if that is an area that interests you. For those of you that are interested in learning more about investing, then I'm actually going to be running a free online workshop around this topic on Monday, the 18th of March. That's 2019 if you're listening to this show in the future. You can register for the workshop online, which is www.themoneypanel.co.uk. And I will also pop a link to the registration in the show notes. The places are limited, so you need to make sure that you register for the webinar in advance. And you can join in your pajamas, like you don't have to show your video. The webinar itself will be from 8 o'clock till 9 o'clock. And have your notepads ready because you'll want to take lots of notes for that particular workshop. So if you haven't already done so, please head over to the waiting list there. And without further ado, I welcome Faith Archer to the show. So a big warm welcome, Faith, to the show. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing all right. Thank you, Catherine.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. So, Faith, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my job, if you like, is writing about money. So my background is as a personal finance journalist, and I still write articles about money. But nowadays, I also have a blog, Much More with Less, and enjoy doing a whole variety of things, including talking to you on the podcast or talking about money on the radio or even recording videos.
A real variety then.
Yeah, makes it fun.
So tell us a little bit about how did you even start in this sort of personal finance space?
By accident, I had come out of my previous job in consultancy. I was temping to make sure I covered my mortgage while I was interviewing for other jobs. I'd been freelancing for dot-com companies just as the dot-com boom went bust. And one of the jobs I got put in for was on the money desk of the Daily Telegraph. And they they asked me back a few times. Then a job came up and they asked if I wanted to apply. And it was something that I don't think I would ever have applied for, having seen an advert cold, but having worked with the team. One of the things that I really liked was my boss, the then personal finance editor of the Daily Telegraph, Ian Cowie, had a really brilliant reputation for promoting through with the team. Rather than recruiting from outside. And so I started off as researcher, and I thought, other roles had come up, things like TV reviewing and so on. I thought that would drive me crazy. But writing about money, writing about personal finance, I thought that was really interesting and helpful, and it wasn't intrusive journalism. It could actually make a genuine difference to people's lives. And so I took that opportunity, and it took my career in a completely different path. I think I was at the Telegraph for about 4 years, and by the time I left, I was their deputy personal finance editor.
Wow, fantastic. And was there any particular topic that you used to write about at that time that interested you more than others?
I think one of the things that interested me the most was we used to do a feature called Cash Clinic. And what that was, when you had readers writing in and saying, look, I really want to be able to retire or pay off my mortgage, or I'm having a child and I don't know how our finances are going to run. And it was the chance to interview the family about what it was they wanted to do with their money and what their current financial situation was. And then I would write that information up and go and talk with 3 different independent financial advisors and get their advice about how people could reach their money goals. And that kind of holistic view of people's financial situation and how to reach their goals, that was definitely the most interesting part for me.
And so is that how you then led into creating your own blog, or how did that come about?
It's going to sound like my whole life is an accident, isn't it? Again, with the blog, I actually started it up because I was doing a charity project at the time that was meant to raise awareness of food poverty. And I thought, if I started a blog, because it was a 5-day challenge, could you feed yourself for £1 a day for 5 days? And I thought, if I'm going to do Live Below the Line, if I start a blog, then I can explain what I've done to prepare, how it goes through the 5 days, and this will help my fundraising. And so that's how it originally came about. I was raising money for UNICEF.
And then you just started writing about how you lived on £1 a day.
I did. To be fair, it was just a 5-day challenge. So I'm not pretending I live on £1 a day permanently. I did it 1 year, then I did it the next year, and then 3rd year came around, and I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I should really give it a push. And I emailed everybody I knew saying, will you sponsor me? And it so happened that because I work as a journalist, some of the people on that list were journalists. And so I actually got picked up to write about Live Below the Line for the Sunday Times and for Mirror Online. And they started coming back to me for articles on other topics as well, on money-saving topics. And so it was something like, I'd kind of always thought of the blogging as something separate from my journalism. But I carried on blogging partly because it was bringing in extra work, but also because I feel very passionately there was a lot of people out there who could do with help with their money, but they weren't necessarily going to read the financial pages of a newspaper, which how I reached people previously. But there's just generations out there that don't pay for newspapers, and through a blog, therefore, I could reach different audiences, reach people who needed help with their money. And it's fun when you have your own blog and you can choose what topics you think are most relevant and how to present them in ways perhaps that will help people understand them the best.
So if you don't mind, Faith, let's talk a little bit more about that, because I know that, this podcast episode is we're really going to kind of dig deep about, food and, food bills particularly are one of the biggest expenses, second to mortgages and rent for most families. And I really want to understand more about the kind of tips that you offer to your audience about how they can save money on food. But if you don't mind, could we just talk a little bit about your experience of building that blogging business? Because I think, in today's world, there are so many opportunities to make extra money, as a sideline business or a hobby business, or even in some instances to give up your main job and just write as your main job. So if you wouldn't mind, Faith, could you just share with us, so when you started this blog, how did you know how to start blogging? Like, did you build a website? Did you get somebody else to do it for you? How did that journey begin?
The blogging I do is very much about saving money. So when I first started my blog, especially because it was raising money for the charity, the idea was not to be spending money on it, but bringing money in. And so I started off with a free blog on Blogspot, and it was as easy as just thinking, right, I want to do a blog for this project. And I Googled, how do I start a blog or how do I start a free blog, and just took it from there. And I think afterwards, getting to know through work, through meeting other people that commissioned me to write as a journalist, and then it turned out that I'm thinking of Andy Webb here, who blogs at Be Clever With Your Cash, and he turned out, Andy, as well as writing for the Money Advice Service, he had a blog. So, come join a Facebook group with other money bloggers. And so I think there was a lot of it was networking and talking to other bloggers and finding out what they did and how they did it. In terms of blogging as a business, the way that I earn most of my money is getting paid to write. That's what I've done as a journalist. That's what I'm comfortable doing now. And so I write posts both to appear on my blog and to appear on other people's blogs about financial topics. And so I think what I'm hesitating is, how you choose which companies you work with. And I have a lot more companies that want me to write for them than I actually end up writing for, because I'm only really comfortable writing for companies that I feel I would, hand on heart, genuinely recommend and ideally use myself. And I suppose that's my personal screen.
I think that's really interesting, isn't it? Because as you say, and particularly as a successful blogger, I guess you get probably a good number of emails every week asking to write for different publications. And I think it is important, isn't it, to write about topics that you feel closely represent something that you're passionate about, or as you say, that you feel like you can back, because otherwise it's not, I guess it's probably not a very interesting experience for you to, or an enjoyable piece of work for you to take on if you're not really kind of behind what they're trying to talk about or the message they're trying to create.
I think part of it is I would like to think that my blog is genuinely helpful for people to improve their financial positions, for people to make the most of their money. And I have specifically turned down, for example, work from high cost lenders. I don't feel I can recommend payday loans or guarantor loans. So I will not work for those companies. I have turned down work about car financing. I appreciate that loads of people need to use car financing options, but I have written quite strong posts about why personally we chose to save up enough money to buy a secondhand car in cash. Because I'm concerned about how PCP financing is, the impact it can have long term on people's financing. So I would like to feel that when people come to my blog, they can genuinely trust that companies, if I am choosing to take a sponsored post, that it is a company that I really recommend and can improve their financial position.
Yeah, fantastic. And just to explain for those that don't know, Faith, what is a sponsored post?
A sponsored post is when a company comes and they pay you to write on a particular topic. And it might be that you get offered money to review product. It's not that the money is designed to ensure a good review. It's more that the money is for your time and trouble and effort to research and write the review. Also, the kind of posts that I probably do more are if it's a topic about a particular financial topic, to explain a financial topic. So I've done stuff about the importance of checking your credit score. I do a lot of posts about encouraging women to consider investing, about how that can make the most of your money, and about how, if you have no background in investing, how you can start thinking about it and trying it, and when it's suitable for your situation.
Yeah, that's an amazing, fascinating topic, and one that is very close to my heart. For those of you that are listening to this podcast, today's the 11th of March. We actually have a free online workshop. It's specifically for women to help them get invested on the 18th of March. I'll drop a link into the show notes, actually, where you can register for that. But Faith, I know this is an area also that you're very passionate about, and I'd love to get you back on the show in our next series, where we're actually going to be talking about investing specifically.
Right.
Because it is really important, isn't it, that I know we're kind of going off subject a little bit here, but I think for women particularly, there isn't enough women investing in the stock market. And I think just over the weekend there was a social media post that I saw from Boring Money that said something like 69% of women, I think it was, aren't investing, and they prefer to hold their money in cash to putting it in the stock market. Why do you think that is, Faith? Why do you think more women aren't investing?
I think there's a lot of factors behind it. I think a part of it, certainly as somebody who came to investing very late, I didn't have any background in investing, and I'd actually been writing about it for years before I put any of my own money on the line, apart from my pension. I think there's the unknown factor. I think for a lot of us, we perceive the stock market as something that's for guys in braces that work in the city. So if you don't have other women actually saying, you know what, I invest, it's difficult to do it if you can't see other examples. I think even for women who have accepted the fact that investing could make the most of their money, you can get there's a lot of concern about risk. I think we tend to, because everybody knows that with investments, your money can go down as well as up. You might get back less than you put into it. And I think we tend to fear risk of loss much more than we appreciate the gains. And actually, the probabilities, if you go for sensible investments over the long term, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, historically, investing has just done so much better than leaving your money stuck in a savings account.
Yeah.
Sorry, Catherine, just one more thing. Also, I think it can be incredibly hard to choose. I think most women, we want to know what we're doing. We want to understand it, and we want to make a good choice. It's not just, I'm going to wing it, I'll bung it in this company. And if you've got a lot of other things in your plate, you don't want to kind of sit down and try and disentangle a whole load of hideous jargon and a huge range of different funds to come up with the right answer. So it kind of gets put off and put off.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's the lack of understanding, the lack of confidence, isn't it, that prevents us from making decisions. And the problem is, as you've just explained, is that when we feel overwhelmed about how to make a decision, we just don't make it. We just bury our heads in the sand, or we just think, no, that's not for me. I don't understand it. So I think there's a lot of work that the industry needs to do to encourage a different way to communicate the benefits of investing. And even as you said, like the word risk, actually, do we understand what the word risk means? And I know Boring Money do a lot of work around the language in the industry, as do many other companies. And I guess we won't go into that in today's podcast episode. We'll save that ready for our second series. But yeah, it's great to understand and see more money bloggers and personal finance journalists like yourself talking about important aspects like investing.
And you know what? I think investing needs to be a lot more normalized. It shouldn't just be other. I write about how to cut your food costs, because that is part of what my life is, and that is part of managing my money. And then I also write about investing in pensions, because they are part of managing my money and part of my life. It's not this strange, it doesn't have to be this strange, weird other thing.
Yeah, and not for the wealthy, right? It's not just for people who has loads of money. This is for, you can invest with as little as a pound.
You really do not have to have huge sums of money. You do need to have spare money. Let's be upfront about that. For anyone who's struggling to make ends meet at the end of the month, or the end of the week, let alone the end of the month, it isn't really suitable long term aside from your pension. You need to have emergency cash, because investing is money that you can leave, you can set aside for at least 5 years and ideally longer, but it doesn't have to be much. As you say, you can invest from £1. There's a lot of different websites you can use for investing that, £25 a month, 50 quid a month. It's not necessarily big sums.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, I think for a lot of people, we're going off subject a little bit, but it's really a really interesting subject, is that, people think investing's not for me, I don't want to invest, but we're actually already investing. How many of us now are in pension schemes? How many of us are in auto-enrollment? How many of us are buying Apple products? We're already investing in companies, and therefore when those companies grow, we receive profit back from what those companies are making. So I guess it is just an understanding and educational piece for me that, it's understanding, what does risk mean? What does the stock market actually mean? And how do you get started as a beginner? We'll definitely get you back on the show, Faye, to talk about that, because I think we could carry on talking for the rest of the show about investing. But going back to this concept of planning and saving for food, I guess, certainly when I coach women through their, creating a financial plan for them, food is one area that seems to be an area that most people have not an issue with as such, but they tend to overspend, or they don't really recognise how much they're spending. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we struggle to kind of set ourselves budgets or amounts on what we actually spend on our food shopping?
I think there's a lot of reasons why you can end up spending a lot on food. And I should say straight off, anybody can spend anything they want to on food. But what I can talk about is if you would like to spend less because you'd like to do other things with that money. So I think some of the reasons that we overspend in practice, waste is a big one. If we buy too much that we aren't able to use before it goes off, I think the Food Savvy campaign over here in East Anglia reckons that most families waste £70 worth of food every month. I think there's also an element of habit. If a lot of food shopping, I think we almost do on autopilot, using the same supermarket, same brands, cooking the same meals, we don't really think about it. I think there's elements of convenience. Anybody trying to juggle a family, sometimes, especially if you're shopping in a hurry, you're aware you're pressed for time, then buying convenience foods, processed foods, ready meals, takeaways, that kind of thing, that can make those kind of snap decisions that make your life easier in the short term, even if in the long term, perhaps those costs mount up to higher than you might like to spend. And I think we use food for all kinds of different purposes rather than purely as fuel. So you kind of want to nurture your family. You might have read about the latest food fashions for superfoods or whatever. So you load up, trolley up with those, and then perhaps don't necessarily know how to cook them when you get them home, or it turns out your kids don't actually want to eat quinoa or something. And we also use food as, it can be a reward, a treat, something for comfort, a bottle of wine to relax in the evening. There are all kinds of reasons that we buy food that aren't just, has everybody got enough calories to survive?
And is there an amount, like an average amount that families spend on food each week?
It's interesting. I had a look at the Office for National Statistics. They do an average household spending survey. And what they found for the average household, so this is 2.4 people, they actually spend £60 a week on food at home, and then about another £30 on takeouts and restaurants. Now, I know for a lot of people, £60 a week might not actually sound very much. I think one of the other interesting things is obviously food spending does vary with income. And so some of the other research shows that higher income families, so they define that as people earning over £63,000 a year, spent 4 times as much on food as low income families, and that was defined as £10,000 a year or less. So it does depend a lot on what money you've got coming in, logically, as to how much you spend on food.
That's interesting, isn't it? Is that because they're buying at different places that are better quality and therefore more expensive? Or because surely they can't be consuming significantly more as an average family of 2.4 if they're earning more?
I think it's going to depend a lot, as you say, the actual, what components make up food spending. Well, it depends where you shop. So are you shopping at the least expensive supermarket, or are you shopping at one that you choose to because you would perceive it to be higher quality? I'm willing to bet that, for example, if you buy all your food at a farmer's market rather than Asda, your food bill is going to be higher. What kind of food do you buy? If your meals are centered around fillet steak and salmon, then that is probably going to be more expensive if you eat a lot of beans on toast.
I wonder if that's convenience led, because I would imagine, and I guess it's a bit of I guess you can't sort of put a sort of sweeping statement over higher earners, but I guess if somebody is in a higher paid job, does that mean therefore maybe that they maybe are commuting into London, or they have a high powered job, which means that they need to buy more convenience food over, having the time perhaps to go to 2 or 3 supermarkets to get their fruit and veg from one and their meat from another? I wonder if there's a kind of a convenience aspect in there.
I think there's definitely can be convenience, especially if you're buying processed food. And then there's the type of processed food that you buy, the kind of, which brand you're going in on as to how expensive it can be. And the elements of takeaways as well. If you're eating out massively, if you're consuming a lot of takeaways, that will see your food spending shoot up.
So what are your favourite places to shop, Faith? Where do you shop?
I think for me, it's a lot of it's about what's close. So combination of location and price. Our local co-op is very convenient for me on the way back from the school run, and that's also, I can get there early in the morning when they've just put stuff on the reduced shelves, the short dated food that's yellow stickered, and so I get a lot of meat and fish that way. I would rather buy, say, high meat content sausages that are marked down because you need them to use them that day or get them into the freezer than buy perhaps cheaper sausages that have a lot less meat in them. And the other place I shop, we have a Morrison's nearby, and I've actually been, I really like Morrison's in terms of the security of their supply chain and their prices compared to somewhere like Sainsbury's.
And so do you physically go into the stores when you're doing your food shop?
I do nowadays because I work from home and they're that much closer, and my children are that much older. I used to do a lot more online shopping pre-children, when both my husband and I worked full-time in offices. Then I always did online shopping, and when the children were younger, because 2 children under 2 in a supermarket.
Oh gosh, I remember those days. I think when they're babies, it's fine because you can strap them in the car seats, can't you? And you can put them on top of the trolley and they're fine. And it's when they get to that kind of toddler stage, isn't it, where they start kicking and screaming. And
there are things that they would like to do in a supermarket that I would not necessarily like them to be doing. Yeah.
Is there a difference between how much we spend if we go into a physical store versus if we were to shop online?
I think there can be. I think fundamental advantages of shopping online is that you can do it hopefully in a relatively calm environment. You can sit there. It's much easier to see the total going up on your shopping basket. If you've got that in the corner of your screen, you are less likely to get distracted. All the tricks that supermarkets do to market food with the displays and the offers on the carousels. So I think if you are on a tight budget, then one thing you could do, and you're less likely to have pester power with everybody around you going, oh, it'd be nice to have that. So you can control it, you can track it, and you may feel more comfortable doing price comparisons. So I use a website called mysupermarket.com. If I'm buying more expensive items, I will check, is this offer actually as good as it says it is, or would I be better getting my husband to get that from Sainsbury's on the way home? The thing that you miss out on, though, is, as I say, I buy a certain amount of food that's yellow stickered. You can't buy that online. You can't take advantage of reduced sections. And sometimes it can be helpful to have the shelves in front of you and do the quick scan, looking at the cost per kilo and go, right, yeah, that is the cheapest option. Rather than online, I think there is sometimes the tendency you kind of click on the favourites that you bought before,
without necessarily looking at the price.
Option.
Yeah. And so when you go shopping, do you have a list with you? Do you meal plan? Like how does the planning part actually work before you leave the house to to hit the supermarkets?
I think it depends whether I'm on a real push to save money or not. Honestly, I can't pretend that I meal plan and shop to a list every single time I go. But I know I've just done a challenge during January where we'd spent quite a lot in December. We had a lot of visitors. I bought extra food for meals that wasn't actually used. So I was really keen in January, let's bring our food spending down. Let's use up the food we have got in the house. And then absolutely, I was doing the kind of, okay, what's in the fridge, what's in the freezer, what's in the cupboard. I'm going to make these 5 meals. I'm just going to buy the extra ingredients that I need to make those into meals. And so I would, even if it's just the back of an envelope out of the recycling, here's 5 meals, here's the few things that I need to buy on top of that with some fresh fruit and veg. That's what I'm going to buy.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, and how much would you say you saved on a week that you were to do that versus just going into the supermarket and buying what you fancied?
Well, compared to our December spending, I think I halved our grocery spending and got it down to, I think it was £44 a week in the end for a family of 4. But the food that we ate cost more than £44 a week because we were using up a lot of stuff that we already had. It's that kind of using up what you got in the store cupboards is great for a month where you're in a pinch and you just need to costs right then. But obviously in subsequent months, you will need to buy more stuff. Things will run out. But I think what it can be really good at is doing that kind of thing, doing something different to shake you out of your habits so that you're not just buying on autopilot, so that you genuinely start thinking, oh, you know what, we really like that meal that uses less expensive ingredients, or I normally always buy that brand, but actually I've tried the own brand or the value range and it was fine.
I love that, kind of shaking up your habits. I think that's a great point to make, because we do just get into habits, don't we? As you say, like, I mean, we do our weekly food bill shop online. We're in like a real set routine with it. So I'll put my hands up. Like, I don't do the food shop. My husband does it. He's the chef in the house. So every Sunday night he logs on. So we use Waitrose purely because we find that Waitrose has the best quality fruit and veg, because we eat quite a lot of fruit and veg in our house. And so he logs on a Sunday night. He pre-books the delivery slot for the Friday, and then he adds in his shopping basket what we need. But he will like meal plan. So we have like a food meal planner on the fridge, and he'll write down what we're going to have over those 7 days. And we'll involve the kids. We'll sort of say to the kids, what do you fancy this week to eat, boys? And so we'll kind of engage them with it, and then we'll have a look at what we have in the freezer already or on our shelves already. And we try and stick to roughly the same amount of spend each week so that we can budget for it. But it does get a little bit dull sometimes. And one of the things that I find quite frustrating sometimes is that, those days where you have those like can't be bothered to cook days,
absolutely,
which happen for me pretty much every day. I'm like, oh, I can't be bothered to cook today. Like, and I'm sure, this is a frustration for many people, and that's, I guess, sometimes where those probably bad habits come in, where we think, oh, maybe we'll just get a takeaway instead. So I think having some flexibility and give in your week is important, isn't it? So that if you have those can't be bothered to cook days, that maybe you've got something in the freezer that is stored for that particular purpose.
I think that's exactly it. It's accepting that we all have evenings when we just don't want to do it. I think some of the things that rather than going straight for the takeaway option, which is going to be more expensive, some of the stuff we do, partly actually, if I've meal planned, then if it gets to the kind of 6 o'clock, everybody's starving point, and I'm going to a flat spin panic. If I then look at my list and it's like, oh yeah, I planned to do that, and I actually bought the stuff, just knowing that I've already made the decision and used the mental energy to choose all the, buy all the ingredients. Sometimes that can get me over the hurdle. But it's just like, oh yeah, I've got all the stuff, I can make that. It doesn't actually take that long. So that's one thing. Second thing is, if you know that you do actually like cooking sometimes, maybe it's at the weekend when you've got more time, cook twice the amount, because then you can freeze the other half. You've got your homemade ready meal there. Another thing I
That's a
have
great
done
tip.
is we have a slow cooker. We won a slow cooker by rocking up when our local co-op was opening. Got a golden ticket, got a slow cooker. My daughter, who was there because she wanted the telly, was most distressed, but I was pleased. Anyway, what it means is I'm a early morning person, and at the weekend, if I know that we've got, say, a family day out, or maybe we've got a night when I'm going to be working all day, and I can tell when we get back at night I'm not going to want to cook. I will try and get something in the slow cooker first thing when I've still got that effort and energy. It's coming home and thinking, oh, there it is in the slow cooker, food that you can just eat without having to do anything else.
Oh, and the smell. Yeah, it's the whole house.
And then the other thing we will have for the real, I cannot face this. We have the concept of the emergency pizza. So the pizza in the freezer. We've always got the fish fingers. The kids are just about not too old to not eat fish fingers. And then it's having the jar of pasta sauce or curry sauce. Having the odd thing of processed food that's just going to make your life that much easier. That can hold your fingers away from the takeaway number.
So I guess, like, in the same way you'd have an emergency fund, you want to have an emergency food pot or a food cupboard or something that you've got a couple of backups in there.
Exactly.
Amazing. And in terms of like inspiration for things like slow cooker recipes, where do you go anywhere in particular for inspiration?
I just Google a lot. I use the BBC recipe websites. I usually find very reliable for budget food. Jack Munro, she's cooking on a bootstrap now. Her first recipe food, if you're really strapped for cash, she's got some great recipes, really low cost. Also, Thrifty Leslie, when we were particularly keen on cutting our food costs. But I think a lot of family, and I pick up recipes if free supermarket magazines or colour supplements and stuff. I still do get a Sunday paper, and so I have those tattered pages where I've ripped stuff out maybe to try it. And talking to the kids, my daughter in particular, she insists on how good her school dinners are. Which at least gives me some comfort. She's getting one more meal a day, and then I will ask her, what do you actually like? Because she is quite particular about her food, and then I'll try and cook some of that stuff, introduce some of those into our menus at night.
Isn't it frustrating though, where they come home and they'll say, "Yeah, I had like pie and veg, and I had carrots," and then you cook carrots at home, and they're like, "Oh," and they won't eat them, and it's like,
it turns out to be the wrong carrots, or you did them in six,
the wrong shape.
It could be in circles, or it can be very frustrating. we try and alternate. So one night I'll cook a banker, something like spaghetti bolognese that I know she loves, and then next night cook something maybe slightly more unusual she hasn't tried before, and see if she'll eat some of that. And then revert to the favourites.
Yeah, always the way. So are there any other tips that you would give to our listeners as to how they can save money on their food bills?
I think swapping. So whatever it is, look at what really torpedoes your food spending now. Is it the takeaways? Is it maybe top-up shops? Is it the particular brands or convenience foods that you're buying? What is it that you are spending more on? And then how can you swap? How can you change those habits? So I would say, I'm going to challenge your husband 1 week. It only has to be one Sunday. It sounds like he's doing a fantastic job of meal planning and, coming up with a shopping list. But physically go to a supermarket, somewhere like Aldi or Morrison's. Just try it, just for once. Because as an ex-Ocado shopper myself, I do appreciate that Waitrose has great quality food, but there are other places out there that sell good quality food too.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you've given him that challenge, because I challenged him last year about this, and he was like, "No, he's so set in his ways with the quality of his fruit and veg. It's just like he's just obsessed with the quality of his his fruit and veg."
Just try it once, because the worst that can happen is that you try it for 1 week, you don't like it, you can swap back. But I think it was a while back. Sainsbury's did when that was my nearest supermarket, they did these little leaflets about cooking on a budget for a family of four, and they used a lot of the value ranges, which I hadn't tried at that time. And I just thought, well, it's a plan for 5 days, I'll just give it a whirl. And it's true, there was some stuff from the value ranges that I didn't like, didn't want to buy again, but there was other stuff that was absolutely fine.
Yeah, we actually use quite a lot of value. Yeah, we use quite a lot of Waitrose value products. In fact, most of the stuff that we have outside of fruit and veg is value-based products. There's a couple of things that we buy branded, but not a huge amount. So, yeah, I think it's more about, as you say, just challenging the habits that you have, even if it is just for a week. Or for a month, challenge yourself. Well, for this month, because we know it's going to be tight, because we've got school holidays coming up, for example, and we know we're going to be spending more money on the kids, that maybe then for that 4 weeks leading up to it, that you become a bit more savvy, and maybe you meal plan if you're not currently meal planning, and then use the money that you've saved to then pop into your emergency fund, or even invest. Let's invest it. But no, there's some fantastic tips there, Faith. So thank you so much for sharing those with us today. The last thing I just wanted to ask you actually is, I know that one of your most successful blogs is how to make a Victoria sponge. So I'm going to pop a link to that in the show notes for anybody who is interested in learning how to make a Victoria sponge, because it's one of those recipes. Like I'm terrible at cooking. I will honestly put my hand up and say I'm not a great chef, but I would love to make a Victoria sponge.
You've got to try it. It's such a simple recipe. It's 5 ingredients for the cake, and it has the joy that you don't have to mess around with icing it either. It's jam in the middle and then a bit of icing sugar sieved on the top. Really speedy. You can use budget ingredients, value range flour, and it doesn't have to be caster sugar. You can use just normal white sugar. I don't use butter. I use Stork. I swear by it for baking. And I used it for the post is actually tips for a village show winning Victoria sponge after entering the Victoria sponge competition at our local agricultural show, the Hadley show.
Why do you swear by Stork? What?
Why do I say that? Because it has really, really good results. You don't have to use butter. Especially if you're doing anything by hand, butter is a right pain to mix in. Whereas Stork is a lot easier if you're using a wooden spoon. It's a lot easier with a wooden spoon. I suppose it makes less difference if you're using a food processor. But I genuinely think it gives really good results, and it's a lot less expensive than butter.
Oh, fantastic tip. I'm going to pass that on to my husband.
You may look shocked, but I bet you if he cooked a couple of cakes, one using butter, one using Stork, I don't reckon in a blind tasting he could tell the difference.
No, I'm sure he couldn't. No. Well, that will be my challenge for this week then. After listening to this podcast, I'm gonna tell him to go food shopping on Sunday rather than ordering it online. And yeah, it'll be interesting actually to see whether we do spend differently to shopping in store. I mean, we've just typically shopped online because, my children are older now, they're 5 and 7, so I could quite comfortably take them to the supermarkets. But I guess we've just got stuck into that rut of it's just easier to do it online. It saves us time. But it'll be interesting to see whether we spend less by visiting the supermarkets than doing it online. So, yeah, thank you so much, Faith, for joining us today. Just a couple of questions, a couple of fun questions at the end of the show, just to kind of get to know you a little bit better. Do you have a favourite Netflix show that you're watching right now?
I think you have to remember I'm a frugal blogger. I'm all about saving money. I do not pay for Netflix. All we spend on the telly is the TV license, and then we have a Freeview box. However, one of the shows that I'm really excited that the second series has just started is Derry Girls, and I believe Derry Girls is available on Netflix as well as normal telly.
Oh, haven't seen that one.
Derry Girls is brilliant. You have to watch it. It's so funny.
Yeah, what are we watching? What did we watch? I can't remember what it's called now. It's like a thriller, something John on Netflix. I can't think what it was called now, but it's quite good. So we're watching that at the moment. But I'll add that to the list. And what about your favourite app, Faith? Money related or non-money related? What's your favourite app right now?
I think the app that I use a lot it's very boring, but it's just Yahoo Mail. I do have my supermarket app on my phone for checking food prices, if I wanted to compare food prices when I'm out and about. And also I use Yolt, which is a money app where it allows you to look at multiple different bank accounts and credit cards from the same app. And I find that extremely helpful for budgeting. I can log in, okay, what's the credit card balance running at? What's come in or out of the current account? Have I been paid for that piece of work that I really should have been? And I can just check it in a few seconds via a single app.
Yeah, I also use Yolt from time to time. I use Money Dashboard as well, which is quite similar, I think, to Yolt. I'll pop both those links in the show notes, actually. But yeah, I think it is really important, isn't it, to have really good insight into what you're spending, what's coming in, what's going out of your account, because it just allows you to make financial decisions much easier when you're more informed about what you're spending.
Fundamentally, I really resent paying any bank charges. I've got the right money in the right place to cover any bills.
Yeah, fantastic. Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing those with us. And thank you for your time today, Faith. I will pop a link to some of those apps and things that you've mentioned there. And if anybody wants to find out a bit more about how they can save more money on their food or get involved with some of the challenges that you regularly do through your social media channels, how can they get in contact with you?
Well, my blog is at muchmorewithless.co.uk, and then I'm at muchmore_less on both Twitter and Instagram. Do have a Facebook page, and actually there's also the Much More With Less Facebook group, the Money Saving Year Facebook group, where I post a different financial tip every day, because I think if you take lots of small individual steps, those small changes add up to make a really big difference.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Fantastic. And I'll pop a link to all of those channels in the show notes, and they'll also be on the website, which is www.themoneypanel.co.uk. Thanks very much for your time, Faith, and we'll see you again on the next series to talk more about investing.
I'll look forward to that.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.